Eternal Strands! It's available tomorrow on PC, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and it's going to be playable through Xbox Game Pass. And I've already played it, and I'm here to tell you all about it. Eternal Strands is a third-person action-adventure game, and in it you play as Bryn, a magic user known as a Weaver who travels in a band of magic-using Weavers, and you're all trying to uncover the mystery of what happened to this city called the Enclave, which went dark because of a cataclysmic event years and years and years and years ago. And you're on the fringes of the city when an inciting incident pushes you guys closer and closer, and you start breaking in to unravel everything that happened years and years ago to make this city crumble in the way that it did because of a giant magical cataclysmic event. How many times am I going to mention the cataclysmic event? There was a huge cataclysmic event. Anyway, when you start the game, you have a very brief tutorial, a very good tutorial that actually has you be way more hands-on than just reading a whole bunch of text about how to play the game. Nice, quick, speedy, gets you going. It gives you an immediate feel for what the combat's going to be like, how just moving around the environment's going to be, and it starts with a dragon. Anytime a game starts with a dragon, that's a pretty good sign, man. It was in this very brief tutorial, where you have a brief run-in with a dragon, that Eternal Strands first impressed me like crazy. The AI for the enemies that you fight is ridiculously cool, combined with the way that their combat system works. One of the first things I did when I came across this dragon in the tutorial was get around to his backside when he started to rear up like he was going to breathe fire, because that's what you do whenever you see a dragon in games. So imagine my surprise when he lifted his wing and aimed his long snake-like neck to aim behind him and underneath him so he could still torch me. I was like, whoa, that's not supposed to happen. Then, because in Eternal Strands you can climb all over the big giant baddies that you fight, I crawled on top of his head, and the dragon reared up and breathed fire straight down at the ground so the fire would go up and encompass his head that I was on. I was like, what the crap? Why is this dragon so smart? But it doesn't just end with the dragon. When I was fighting little guys, including wolves, I'd hold up the shield, just waiting for them to hit me, and they would circle around me knowing I have a shield. They wouldn't attack unless I kept the shield constantly aiming toward them. The AI in this game is very creative. Much later on, I fought a snow-covered turtle feller that I can't remember the name for, and I put a whole bunch of fire on the ground to make sure he'd have to walk through the fire to come to me. He didn't. He found the longest, most go-around the fire pathway possible just to avoid going in the fire. If there's anything about Eternal Strands that I want to sing from the rooftops, it's that their enemy AI is super impressive and fun and creative. Oh, when fighting one of the huge, statue guys, the arcs they're called, they look like giant walking colossi. When fighting them, they'll try and pick you up with their hands if they see you climbing on them. And the Ark of the Living Flame, he was holding a staff in one hand, so I was crawling naturally on the hand that wasn't holding the staff, so you can't grab me. He switched the staff to his other hand so he could then grab me. It made me mad at that stupid little giant monster, but I was also very impressed. Forgive me, I went on a total tangent there about the enemy AI, but I'm so impressed with it. It's very cool. Anyway, after the tutorial, you go to your base camp, meet the people at your camp, and they start sending you out on missions. And that's the basic gameplay loop for Eternal Strands. You go out on a mission, gather materials that you can take back to camp and use for various things, such as crafting new armor and gear that you find blueprints for as you're out adventuring as well. Working on little side quests for the characters in camp as they come up, and progressing the big quest... and progressing through the main quest as well. You don't always have to take down a big giant boss creature before you can return home, but if you do that, you will get little magical strands that can upgrade the magical spells that you have, and taking down big bosses for the first time will get you even more magical spells, etc., etc. All of that structure, very good. Makes sense, nice to follow, easy to know what you want to work on next. Bing, bang, bosh. Now for the first rough part of Eternal Strands, the combat with the little fellers. Little wolfy creatures, little chameleon creatures, the little miniature arc robots, or just anything that's not one of the giant bosses. It's kind of rough. Not in the sense of how you control Bryn, but it's just not that satisfying. It definitely feels like Bryn's combat system was entirely made for fighting the giant creatures and curated to that end, so that fighting the giant creatures feels as great as possible, and the little creatures were thrown in so that players would have something to do when they're not fighting giant creatures. I understand that, and I think that's a good decision, but the little creatures still just don't feel that satisfying to fight. Their AI is impressive, but part of the reason they don't feel that satisfying to fight is that your magical spells, even the two that you start with, the Kinetic Grasp and the Ice Wall, just trivialize every single fight, no matter what difficulty you're playing on. If you're fighting anything that's not a giant boss that shakes the earth when they walk. You can just freeze a creature in place and wail on them and they can't do anything about it, or pick them up and throw them off a cliff. That's it. Sure, throwing them off a cliff doesn't give you their materials that they dropped, but there's so many of the stinkers that you can fight them anytime you want and just throw them off the cliff so you can be done with the fight. It doesn't feel that rewarding to fight the small enemies. Even later in the game when they start dropping more valuable resources, it still doesn't feel like the kind of thing that you want to do, because it can sometimes take a little bit of extra time, even when you've upgraded your material. Even when you've upgraded your weapons and your spells, and taking down small guys is really quick, it just doesn't feel like it's worth it. It feels like they're a little bump in the road almost all the time, and that is a big bummer. Sometimes getting the little guys is a blast when you have the kinetic two-handed sword that can just throw them through the air, but the only problem with that is that throwing them through the air is only fun how many times, and that's totally probably just a me problem. For people that really love sandbox games and will never get tired of hurling things across the screen, you might love seeing the little critters go flying all the time. But eventually it doesn't feel like there's any kind of combat or engaging challenge happening, and it's just throwing toys against a wall, if that makes sense. Exploration in Eternal Strands I actually really like. I think it's fun to try and find ways into buildings, especially using your fun creative magical abilities and your climbing all over stuff. I wish the game would have leaned more into exploration and found fun, unique ways to traverse the world, and even some puzzle elements using your magic, rather than focus on fighting the little characters. Because the little fights, they're just not that engaging or fun. There are some instances where you have to find a brazier and light it with your fire magic, but that feels like the peak of the magical exploration stuff. It would be way more interesting if there were times that you had to combine your freezing, kinetic, and flame magic in fun ways just to open doors and get secret goodies. Now, on the flip side, fighting the bosses, way fun. The bosses are great. In fact, if there's any reason I think a person should play Eternal Strands, it is to fight some of these boss characters. The systems that Eternal Strands has in place with the enemy AI and your character's magical spells work beautifully together. I love that you can freeze them to the ground. I love that you can hurl anything you find around you at them. One of the most fun things that I did was I would use the kinetic mine to make a little mini black hole on their tummies, and I throw some fire in there so they're just eternally cooking as the fire swirls around in there, and then make it blow up so they take even more fire damage. There's a whole lot of fun, imaginative, creative things you can do with the wombo combo of all the spells fighting the giant bosses. And seeing how they evolve throughout the course of the game is a lot of fun. I'm not going to show too many of the bosses that are in the game because I don't want to spoil things. You're probably just going to see ones in this video in the background from the trailers. But I think my favorite is still just the Ash Peak dragon that you fight at the beginning of the game. Climbing onto it while it's flying, awesome. And with the dragon and any of the bosses, when you find their strand that you have to extract in order to get a magical material from them, that is some of the most tense, amazing moments that the game has to offer. When the music is swelling and you're pulling that and it's, oh my gosh, are they going to flip me around or throw me off? Am I actually going to be able to pull it off? And then BAM! And that Austin Wintory music just kicks in. Ooh! That Austin Wintory music, by the way, helps a lot with the boss fights feeling great and just with the exploration. The music, pitch perfect, no notes, very good. If I had any complaint with the giant bosses for Eternal Strands, I think it would just be I would want them to be a little bit more unique from one another. I think they already do a fantastic job at that, but I'd want to see it pushed even further, if that makes sense. That's another thing. I think that Eternal Strands would be better if there was no combat with little characters at all, and it was just focusing on exploration and the bosses. Now, how about the story and the characters? Yeah. I don't think that they're actively bad, but they're not that interesting. The story itself is... it's fine. It just doesn't feel like there's anything that interesting or exciting happening. There's a whole bunch of lore. There's a whole bunch of world building. They definitely gave the world a ton of thought. But it feels like a miss the forest for the trees kind of situation, where they were so focused on all of the world building stuff that they forgot to have some characters that you could really latch onto. My biggest problem is with our player character Bryn, who just is automatically amazing at everything. Of course, a player who's controlling a main character is going to complete everything, and characters will be like, oh my gosh, you actually saved the day. But Brynn is too aware that she's very good at everything. She has a very insufferable, I'm the best, and I'm just here to help. And you can have her say different things, dialogue choice, but even with a dialogue tree. But even her, oh no, it wasn't just me stuff comes across as very prideful and flawless. I guess you could say the pridefulness is a flaw thing, but she just feels like there's no interesting character points or development things going on with her. Brynn just feels devoid of any kind of interesting stuff for a player to latch onto, other than, hey, I put some fun armor on her. Oh, we're going to tangent away from the story because I forgot to mention armor crafting stuff because I am one big fat tangent ball. I have mixed feelings about the crafting system in Eternal Strands. Part of me likes that you can take almost anything you find and just make stuff with it. Like, you don't need to find a recipe that says, okay, I need 6 of this very specific item and 3 of this very specific item. If a piece of armor or a weapon says it wants 6 carved resources, there are so many resources that fall into the category of carved resource, and you can just slot in whatever you want. And part of that is very cool, but part of it isn't. The cool part is you don't have to worry that much about finding the right stuff. The less cool part is you still kind of do, because you want to find rarer carved materials or rarer, whatever rarer that, so that your stuff can keep getting upgraded. On the flip side, it's nice that you can literally take your stuff you've made and recraft it, and you get all those resources back from the first time you crafted it. But at the same time, I don't like how, based on the material you use, that's what changes the color of your armor and gear. I know that it sounds silly to care that much about the appearance of your armor, but when you use the best materials, sometimes your outfit's gonna look really gross because you used all the best stuff and the colors clash in a weird way. It'd be much nicer if you could just build it and then find some dyes as a collectible that you get to change your armor's stuff around with. I think it's a very unique system, and I'm glad that they experimented in this way, because it definitely doesn't feel like other games. But it feels like it's like a 50-50. Some of it's good, some of it's not as engaging. And when you just get into the mindset of, oh, I just want the best stuff so I can kill everything better, and then you lose out on the fun building a cosmetic thing that you can show off and be like, I'm proud of my character. She looks like this now. It's just not the most rewarding kind of crafting system. Anyway, because I love jumping around in my reviews like someone who's had too much caffeine. Back to the story. I was bashing on Brynn. The rest of the characters don't feel that great either. Everyone just feels so flat. And I'm not coming after the voice actors when I say that, but it just feels like there's not much emotion in anything going on.
Brynn did face down an Ash Peak Drake and lived to tell the tale. I think we're in good hands.
Yes. I have every confidence that she will make a great point.
As long as we don't all die here first.
Everything is delivered at such a very mid-level range. Even when characters are supposed to be having more emotional things happening, their voices never really crescendo or decrescendo in any kind of way that draws you into the storytelling going on. Part of that could also be some of the writing, which is just way too therapeutic. And what I mean by that is not therapeutic for the player, but it feels like characters are constantly having therapy sessions with one another. It feels like the characters are always talking to each other, like HR is right outside the door and they don't want to offend anybody. Even when some big traumatic story stuff might be going on, they're like, no, we're going to be calm and level-headed about this. It doesn't feel like anyone in the story, any of the characters, want to be here, even though they keep saying, yes, we want to be here and we're excited. It's like, well, you can keep saying that, but the more you say it, the less I believe you. There's a whole lot of telling and not a lot of showing. There's one character, Sev, who they keep saying, oh, he's so shy. He's so shy. Yes, he is shy. I would have never known he was shy unless they kept saying it. None of his dialogue or his voice acting makes me think that this character is shy. But they keep saying, oh, he's so shy. Okay. And that problem kind of persists for all of Eternal Strands' plot and character stuff. They keep telling you stuff, but I'm like, okay, I guess I take your word for it, but I don't really believe much of it. One of the things I think could really help with that is if they're 2D portraits that they show for the characters, had some more range to them, some more visual range. The only thing that changes for them are some very, very slight facial tweaks. I completely understand how hard it is to make a whole bunch of art for a game, especially art that is as detailed as their 2D stuff is. I feel like to make time and money for those more detailed 2D drawings that show their characters being more expressive so we can get more attached to them and actually see them exhibit some kind of human emotions, I would have removed the in-game cutscenes that are here and there, because their animation using the in-game models right before you go into playing, they're not the best. And I would have completely removed the 2D cutscenes that you see at the very beginning of the game that are fully animated in 2D, because they don't feel tonally consistent with the rest of the game, and they don't look that amazing, to be honest. I think I would have replaced those 2D cutscenes with just static images that were more detailed and having the actors speak over them like other games have done, and I would have put in more detailed 2D drawings for the characters just in their normal dialogue, so we feel like they're actually people that we want to keep coming back to talk to. Because Eternal Strands does have a lot of talking, a lot of writing, a lot of character stuff, and a lot of it means almost nothing. The characters already feel arced out, finished, and just static in a lot of ways. There are some actual changes and things that happen, yes, but it doesn't feel like any of it has any kind of real consequence or is that interesting to follow. Pushing through the game for me was not anything to do with what was going on with the story, and more to do with I want to unlock more spells, I want to see more bosses, and I want to fight them. The story just didn't pull me in, but it might pull some people in. If I'm being honest, I think D&D fans will have a lot to like about Eternal Strands, especially with how much world building there is. I think they'll have a lot to dive into and think, oh, this character species interacts with that character species like this, and we can see that, and that character here and that character there. You can kinda see that, but I think D&D people will enjoy it. And I mentioned animation just a bit ago. I want to say something about the animation, and that is that the in-game animation when you're playing the game for the enemies and for Brynn, very good. I can't believe how good the animation is for when she's crawling around stuff. It is hard to make a system where you crawl all over the bosses like Shadow of the Colossus. There's a reason Shadow of the Colossus was a big deal when it did it, and that not a lot of people have done it since, because it's tricky. But they did a fantastic job with that. It also just feels great to use, crawling all over the big bosses. Animation-wise, it looks really good, and actually, Brynn has great animation anytime you're running around playing as her. One of my favorite details is that when you're walking down a slope, she holds her arms out, balancing herself in a very nice way, leaning back into the slope. The animation team knocked it out of the park. General presentation, very good. Like I said, I like the 2D drawings. I wish there were more of them and they were more expressive. Music from Austin Wintory, very good. Always good. Austin Wintory does not miss. And I think that's everything. If you're looking for a smaller game that is just a ton of fun to play around with the systems of, Eternal Strands is a very easy thing to recommend. If you're looking for something that's going to be one of your favorite stories you've ever heard, I don't know that you'll find that here unless you're just a super big lore nerd and you really, really like digging into the lore. There's tons of lore, but at the same time, the lore doesn't really feel like it's represented that much in the characters or the things they say and do. I don't know. I feel like they could have done a whole lot more on the story side to make us feel more engaged with the characters. The game feels like they had the idea for giant combat and they had to wrap everything around that to send it out in a package. And for what it's worth, a lot of it holds well. The game's art style is great, animation's great, and I think that the general setting is great. I just wish that we had more meaningful combat with small enemies, or no small enemies at all, and just boost the game's exploration to be more driven by the magic interactions with the world, or to make the characters more characters rather than just, I don't know, they feel like empty archetypes that are filling out a specific role just to carry things along because there has to be a plot because it's a video game kind of feeling, if that makes sense. With how impressive the AI is and the boss fights, even with all the stuff that didn't feel as rewarding to me, I think I can give Eternal Strands an easy B. Easy to recommend to people that want to play a game that's actually being experimental and trying to push the medium forward by trying out different stuff. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thank you to Yellow Brick Games for access to Eternal Strands. I've participated in a bunch of their pre-release alphas and demos, and I think the game in its full release form now is at the best it's ever been. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for listening. I already said that, I think. Okay, goodbye.